So this really isn't a type of artwork that I usually create, or at least not the type of art that I usually share online. This is part of a personal sketchbook project, a mixed media project that I started this year because I wanted to bring in more fun into my art practice. Last year, 2023, was incredibly hard. I went through a creative burnout, and I thought of a personal project to work on to help reignite that spark and bring joy back into my practice. So I bought myself a sketchbook, and I wanted to bring in different mediums, use them in combination in ways that I hadn't done before, or maybe not in a while, and explore color, explore mixed media, allow myself to play, allow myself to just work more intuitively. But at this point, I think this is sketchbook spread number 14, and I have gone through this mixed media process enough that I now know the steps or phases that I need to follow in order to arrive at the results that I enjoy. So let's jump right in. Phase number 1 for me is defining my idea or my concept. I am bringing in one object and one scene, whether it's an exterior building facade or shop facade or an interior scene. And the object goes hand in hand with the place. So for this one, I decided to go with an ice cream shop and a banana split. Once I have my concept, it's time to look for reference photos. So I look for reference photos in different places online. And once I have my 2 reference photos of my object and my place or my facade, I open them up in Photoshop and edit them. Oftentimes I flip the image, I overlap them in a certain way so that the composition can look well integrated in that spread. I do quite a bit of editing of those images until I arrive at a collage that I enjoy. And I make sure to open up a document in my photo editing software that is exactly the size of my entire sketchbook spread. So I'm working in a square format sketchbook, but I am using the entire spread. So that means that it's double the width, if you will. And I make sure that the collage reference photos that I'm observing are exactly the same proportions as the proportions provided by my open sketchbook that I'm going to be working in. When I am creating that visual composition, that collage in my photo editing software, I start thinking of what colors I'm going to be bringing in, what am I going to be taking out or changing, because I always like bringing in lots of myself into the piece and changing things, removing things, bringing things in, changing colors, etc. It is time to move on to phase number 2, which would be creating my pencil sketch. So I always get started with a pencil sketch. I use an HB pencil, draw nice and light, and take my time with the preliminary pencil sketching process, because this is going to be the foundation for everything else. And once my pencil sketch is looking good to me, I have utilized my drawing space effectively, anything that has to do with perspective or proportions is looking okay, it is then time to move on to phase number 3, which would be bringing in the colored pencils. When it comes to these sketchbook explorations, one of my objectives is exploring color and color schemes and making sure that I'm limiting the amount of colors that I am bringing in, because I want everything to look well integrated and harmonious at the end. So before starting with my colored pencil work, I always take time to choose a limited amount of colors. I always use a couple of grays. I am really enjoying French gray, which is a slightly warmer gray. And you're going to see how first I use these grays to go over my pencil work, kind of defining those edges of my shapes before actually using my color. But I have my 2 French grays, a lighter French gray and a darker French gray. And then I oftentimes bring in, say, 7 to 8 colors, and I leave it at that. I am using colors that are similar to those in the reference for the banana split, but I am changing the colors in the actual ice cream parlor facade. And you're going to notice that I repeat the colors that I use in the banana split. I use those same colors in the building facade, and this helps everything integrate together very well and look very cohesive at the end. And it's a big thing that I am exploring in these sketchbook spreads. And I also have in mind when I am choosing my Prismacolors that I am bringing in, that those are the same colors that I'm going to be bringing in when it comes to my watercolor paint. So as you saw, first I traced over my pencil work with my lighter French gray. And then once I had my gray down, which helped intensify those edges a little bit more, bring a little bit more definition and contrast, and simultaneously help me warm up with my colored pencil so that I can approach everything more loosely, and help me get a little bit of that Prismacolor colored pencil wax on my paper before bringing in my color. But once that gray was in, I started bringing in the actual color, and I simply went over the gray all throughout the piece, thinking of the color that I would be bringing into that particular element or section of my piece. So in other words, if the cherries are going to be painted red, then I traced around that shape with a red. For the whipped cream, which is white, I just left the gray edges like that without adding any color on top. If the banana has a kind of beigey color, then I'm going to trace around the banana with a similar color to that. When it comes to bringing in that first kind of definition of edges with my colors, my objective is not to create perfect outlines or anything like that. You can see how I'm just going over certain sections of my shapes. And sometimes I'm starting to incorporate little marks and lines. So yeah, I'm not really trying to create an outline look or anything like that. I'm just trying to get some color on my paper. And this also helps me understand what colors I'm going to be using in each area of my piece before starting with my watercolor washes. With that third colored pencil phase done, it was then time to move on to the watercolor washes. So I just have a lot of fun with this. I make decisions along the way as well. I do have a general idea of the colors that I'm going to be bringing in for each area, because with the colored pencil line work, I did start to decide that already, but I am allowing myself to make choices as I go. And you're going to notice as well that I bring in little watercolor effects such as bleeds and blooms. I am painting loosely and quickly. I am making sure not to go in to do over blending or try to get rid of organic, imperfect things that happen when placing my watercolor on my paper. I'm, for the most part, trying to allow the paint to do its own thing. You can see how I got some bleeding in the cherries where the red kind of ran into the grays that I placed in the whipped cream. That is perfectly fine. I really like how the bleeds look in those cases, and it leads to a more interesting, unique vibe. And as I said, I'm painting quickly. My intention here is to create an expressive, kind of fresh result. So avoiding over blending or fixing the paint too much or just doing too much layering is going to help me arrive at those lighter, expressive, looser results that I'm going for. And you can also see how I'm incorporating little blooms. So for example, in the red stripes in the awning right above that window, you can see how I dropped in a little bit of yellow over that red while it was still wet, creating a nice range of both color and value in those stripes. And I'm doing the exact same thing in the windows. I'm going in with a light gray first, and while that gray is still wet, I drop in a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow to help convey some of the color that is inside of the shop. And this leads to a more interesting expressive look as opposed to just leaving everything a flat gray. And for my gray, I am utilizing my favorite gray color mixture, which is a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. By mixing together blue and brown, you can create a beautiful, versatile gray, and you can change the temperature of your gray by adding more brown or more blue into the mixture. If you add more brown into the mixture, it's going to be a warmer gray, and if you add more blue into the mixture, it's going to be a cooler gray. So I continue moving through this process nice and quick. I am just using my size 8 round brush, by the way, and I am using a slightly larger size 14 round brush to paint my larger washes in the bottom of the piece and in the top left of the piece a little bit later. Okay, so changing the colors quite a bit in the building facade here. And you can see how pretty much I'm repeating the same colors that I had already used in the banana split. And here I'm starting to paint in that wash in the bottom. I decided to go with the same gray that I used in the windows to create a little bit of a sidewalk vibe there. But even in those grays, I do place a little bit of my yellow for some variation in hue. And then when it comes to the background for the banana split, I decide to go with the yellow, and I drop in a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of red right there. Here I'm going into those white sections to just develop a teeny tiny bit of a subtle gray value so that those white sections don't look completely flat. And then it is time to do a little bit of a vignette style background for my banana split. I just go with a little bit of a yellow there. I do want to make sure that I'm bringing in plenty of the white paper as part of the piece when I am creating these. So I leave the entire upper left portion of this just completely white with those two electricity cables. After working on those watercolor washes, I allowed everything to dry completely. I think I went to have lunch and then I came back, so it was like 45 minutes after everything was completely dry, and it was time to move on to the fifth and final phase of this mixed media process, where I go back to the colored pencils. So this is what I would refer to as a sandwich method, because I went in with the colored pencils, then I did the watercolor washes, then I go back to the colored pencils. The objective with this final phase with the colored pencils is to just increase the contrast and intensify the darkest darks. So I don't want to go in and cover up the work that I've already done with my watercolor washes. I am just looking to define certain parts of certain shapes, so going over certain edges of my shapes, not all around them. And I'm also using some light scribbling motions and mark making techniques in those deepest, darkest shadow areas where I want to intensify those darkest darks. And those little teeny tiny scribbles actually create, when seen from a bit of a distance, they create a little bit of a irregular abstract shape for those deepest, darkest shadows, which is exactly what I want. And those little scribbling motions can also help add interest and an expressive look to the piece. So at this point, I really enjoy bringing in at least some amount of mark making. I usually go back to the same color that I was using in the first colored pencil part of the process, as I was first defining those edges along my elements, to just do a little bit more overlapping of colored pencil to darken certain shadow areas. But another important thing that I do in this part of the process is I bring in a wild card color. This is a dark color, so I usually go with a blue or a purple, and it's a color that I use all throughout the piece to add even more contrast in those darkest dark areas. I really enjoy bringing in a wild card color because it not only helps me increase the contrast by doing more overlapping in those darkest areas, but also because I am using it all throughout the piece, it helps once again unify everything because I'm repeating it all throughout the piece. And as I said, I usually go with a purple or an indigo, but I think it's a great opportunity to make another artistic choice as you're choosing that wildcard color so that the piece can be even more expressive, more unique, and more your own. I'm really avoiding using black in these pieces because black can be very stark looking, very unnatural, and it can really lead to more of an outliney vibe, and that is something that I'm trying to stay away from. So that is it for my mixed media process so far. I really hope that this was inspiring, that I gave you some new ideas to try, and especially for those of you who are struggling right now with something similar to what I was going through last year. Maybe you've lost that spark with your creative practice, you want things to be fun again. Why not take up a personal project like this? Maybe it's a sketchbook, maybe it's a series of new pieces, but try using materials and supplies in a different way from what you're used to, and allow yourself to explore and play with no expectations. And you just might be surprised by how much fun you're having and how much you're able to discover about yourself as an artist and new techniques that you can bring into future pieces that you create. Thank you so very much for joining me on this one. If you have any questions or any experiences of your own to share, or any mixed media tips that you might want to share with the community, please go ahead and leave them down below in the comment section. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so very much for joining me today. I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy your art practice and see you very, very soon.